Welcome to the official Jets podcast presented by Amazon Web Services, episode 2 of the work from home edition here, the free agency breakdown. It's 8:38. It's Tuesday, I believe. Yeah, it's Tuesday. All the days feel the same. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, and we have a lot to get to today, but let's just kick things off right off the bat. The Jets officially made their first move of free agency, re-signing or agreeing to terms, should I say, with starting left guard for 12 games this past season, Alex Lewis. Joe Douglas, of course, said that the offensive line was going to be a priority for this team in the offseason and every season and offseason in which he is the general manager. And his first semi-official move, because of everything going on and the league technically starting tomorrow, Alex Lewis is a member of the New York Jets. And then it was reported that the Jets had agreed to terms or reportedly struck a deal with Broncos center Connor McGovern. So, EA, let's just start with the re-signing of Alex Lewis, because that was the agreement to terms that was official. Of course, the social platforms put it out there. So what do you think of the move and what this means for the Jets now and moving forward?
Well, Greens, good evening to both you and Liv. Happy to be with you guys once again as we roll on here through free agency. Just a crazy time we're living in. Kevin Durant test positive for coronavirus today, along with 3 other Brooklyn Nets. You got Tom Brady announcing that he's no longer going to be a New England Patriot. And much of the United States on lockdown. So I feel blessed to have an opportunity to keep on talking a little bit about football with you guys and maybe get our minds off of things just for a moment. And I hope we can provide just the slightest distraction for everybody out there. But yeah, Alex Lewis, tough, hard-nosed guy. Remember when he was acquired by the Jets, Baltimore was actually going to put him on waivers, but Joe Douglas said, "Oh no, I'll give you a draft pick." And he came in last year, Greens, supposed to play a reserve role, but then the Kelechi Osemele situation occurred and Lewis came on board. I thought he played pretty well. And he started 12 consecutive games for the Jets. So I thought all along that would be a guy of the 6 Jets unrestricted free agents who started along the offensive line last year. Was not surprised at all that Douglas brought him back. And I would also say that Joe Douglas is following up on everything he has said so far. Said he's going to emphasize the offensive line while he agreed to terms with George Fant from the Seattle Seahawks. Then he re-signs Alex Lewis. And then tonight we find out the Jets signed or agreed in principle, correcting myself here, agreed in principle with former Broncos center Connor McGovern.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Joe Douglas and how he's been talking about building this offensive line, one of the most important things to do first and foremost is to take a look at the pieces you already kind of had inside that locker room and say which pieces worked. So for them to bring back Alex Lewis, who I think played such a critical role on the offensive line this past season, is really huge. And like you already mentioned, EA, it's kind of crazy to have a guy who originally wasn't really meant to be a starter, and now you're signing him and bringing him back for 3 years. So he also had, he was personally, I don't know about you, Ethan, but he was one of my favorite guys to always interview in the locker room. He's always willing to do a one-on-one, no matter what.
Alex Lewis is one of the more interesting guys. Yeah, he's a character, that's for sure. And I don't know if a lot of fans know this, but he has a dance background because his mom was a dance teacher when he was a kid, and then he took dance. And so he was big into dancing when he was little, all different forms. I asked him what his favorite form of dance was. He said, I dabble in a little ballroom, a little hip hop, a little bit of whatever.
I love that. But
that was before he was like 300 some pounds. And, it's funny because these past 2 days feel like it's been forever, and everybody's on the edge of their seat waiting to see not only what the Jets do, but what their team does in free agency. But so far, before free agency technically opens tomorrow, I believe it's at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, the Jets and Joe Douglas theoretically have agreed in principle with 3 offensive linemen. And I believe those are really the only moves that have been reported on the surface so far of George Fant, the former Seahawk, re-signing Alex Lewis, and then bringing in Connor McGovern from the Denver Broncos, who's been their starting center for the past 2 seasons. He actually tweeted, I mean, nothing's official yet, I know, but he tweeted, couldn't be more excited to be a Jet. Hopefully with all this craziness going on, we can get to work soon. Excited for big things to come. Hashtag take flight. And that is some positivity from the Jets' new center, EA. And I think Jets fans should be excited about the direction that Joe Douglas is going, not only by addressing the offensive line, but really a bargain so far on these deals, not going for the splashy guys, but going for a more quantity and quality and finding the perfect mix of those two.
Well, value. That's the word I'm going to look for. And a guy like Fant, he's got experience, Greens, and lived both at left tackle and at right tackle, was a third tight end for the Seattle Seahawks at times as well. I'm sure he projects to be a tackle for the Jets. We'll have to hear Adam Gase and Joe Douglas talk about Fant, but he could be potentially your starting left tackle in 2020. And then Lewis, again, one of those tough, hard-nosed maulers. He's a good locker room guy. I think it also underscores what Joe Douglas said, has continued to say. He's looking for certain types of guys, people who love football. He said that there are too many easy ways out, and he's looking for competitive guys, team-oriented guys. And then he follows that up today with Connor McGovern, who former 5th-round pick from the Denver Broncos. And if you look at the trajectory of his career, he started out, he didn't play his rookie season. And then he got in and he was playing some guard and center. And then in the 3rd and 4th seasons, he became the full-time center for the Denver Broncos. And Philip Lindsay became the first undrafted free agent in the history of the National Football League to record back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. And the guy calling the signals and helping the quarterback with protections is a very important piece, because the Jets' most valuable player is Sam Darnold.
Liv, did you see the video of George Fant catching a football and he had a reception on Monday Night Football for the Seattle Seahawks and their highlighter green uniforms?
I did not see that. You're going to have to send me that link.
Well, you got to look for it, because it's evident that he is extremely athletic. And,
well,
I know
I will, sorry to interrupt you, but real quick, I will say that somebody did send me a video on Twitter of him absolutely destroying people in basketball. So I did see that.
Yeah. So we talked about it yesterday, that he's an athletic guy. And I think that Randy Lang was doing some research, or basically our historian, the best stats guy in the Northeast. And Randy came across his article that basically said Fant wanted an opportunity to play on the left side of the line. And whether or not he found that with the Jets, I guess will be to be determined, but we'll see. And, as we move forward to the official start of free agency, if the Jets want to look to add some more pieces along the offensive line, there's still a handful of guys out there that could be starters, and one guy that I think piques my interest. And I don't know if the signing of Alex Lewis makes this unlikely, but Andres Pete, who played for the Saints for the past couple seasons. I mean, he's a Pro Bowler in 2018 and 2019. He's a former 1st-round pick in 2015. And when you look at these guys, I mean, I'm just curious to see if Joe Douglas is interested in any of the top 2nd-tier options. I mean, you look at Jason Peters. I know I mentioned him last night. He's old. He's 38 years old. Andrew Whitworth, the left tackle for the Rams for the past couple seasons.
It's not old, Greens.
All right, fine, but it's old in NFL years. Terms. It is old in NFL years, and I think that Andrew Whitworth is, another one of those guys where I'd be curious to see would Joe Douglas want to go after either of those two, because if you were to sign Jason Peters or Andrew Whitworth, I would imagine George Fant would be playing the right side. But then yet again, I don't know. And, I think a lot of fans want to see some more additions to the offensive line. And a lot of fans will point to the Bills from last year and how they approached free agency. And they signed 7 offensive linemen. And they just said, you know what, we're gonna build a wall around Josh Allen. And Joe Douglas loves his big uglies. So I don't know if this prohibits them from going after these kind of guys, or if we're looking at a different tier after Lewis, Fant, and McGovern.
A good point about the Bills last year, because a lot of those signings, like a guy like Quentin Spain, who they just re-signed here in free agency, were value-based signings. They had the one guy with the very lucrative contract, and that was center Mitch Morse. So, I'm starting to see some similarities there, Greens. I'm glad you mentioned the Bills, because they wanted to fortify what was in front of Josh Allen. Now, I would also add, we all, we followed the combine. We were there. One thing that struck me was Joe Douglas was very complimentary of Brian Winters. So, left to right now, you could be looking at Fant, then Alex Lewis, McGovern, Winters, and remember, Chuma Edoga got some starting experience as a rookie last year, so he'll be entering his second professional season. And another thing I'd like to stress is that the Jets are still sitting there with the 11th overall selection. And again, one of those really talented 4 tackles could be on the board. And maybe the Jets like all those options, and maybe they could still go tackle early in the draft.
Yeah, especially when you mentioned a couple of older guys. Ethan, you mentioned Jason Peters, Andrew Whitworth. I don't know. For me personally, do you think it makes more sense to pick up guys who are a little bit older? Or does it make more sense now that you've signed a couple of guys in free agency and you have some guys that might be returning to then just turn your focus to the draft?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that it's twofold. I think, first of all, I don't know. This is just me and with some guessing here. I feel like Joe Douglas, between the 2 older guys that I mentioned, would feel more comfortable bringing in Jason Peters, considering he spent time with the Eagles and he knows probably better than anybody else in the Jets organization what Jason Peters could have left in the tank compared to Andrew Whitworth. And Jason Peters is, I feel like, one of those staple guys that Joe Douglas would want to emulate in terms of traits. And, I know Jason Peters has had injury questions in the past, but from everything that you read about Jason Peters, it seems like he can still play, and there's a decent amount left in the tank. And the benefit of going the draft route is, one, the price you pay for some of these guys because they're on a rookie contract, and 2, just their youth. And the benefit of all these guys is they all have experience on the right side. So let's say theoretically you did sign Jason Peters, who's been, a staple left tackle in the NFL for years, and you drafted Andrew Thomas out of Georgia, let's say. Andrew Thomas has played left tackle for the Georgia Bulldogs the past 2 years, but his freshman year he started at right tackle. So it's not new for him. Whereas if you look at Jedrick Wills, he's never played on the left side of the line at Alabama or in high school. So there's still so many ways that Joe Douglas can add to this offensive line. And the one that we haven't talked about yet is trade. And Joe Douglas has consistently said there's so many avenues in which you can add to a team at any position. But because we're talking about the O-line, one of the big fish names out there that's been dangled around is Trent Williams, the Redskins left tackle.
Yeah, but what would the price be? And where does
I think price.
Yes.
I feel like the price isn't in the draft capital you'd give up. I feel like the price would be in the extension that he supposedly is seeking. So I think I'm just using Trent Williams as an example, but I feel like Joe Douglas could go down that route too. If you wanted to bolster the line, you could always examine trade just as Douglas did in August with Alex Lewis.
Understood. You mentioned Peters a couple times, and listen, I'm not taking anything away from him. A great career, a well-respected guy, tremendous in the room, and you mentioned it, Green, still a very effective player despite his age at 38 years old. But if you bring in Fant, I kind of think you're going to pencil him in as starter. I don't want to get ahead of myself and speak for these guys.
I agree with you, though.
I know you're going to have to win the job, and the other guy to factor into the equation even prior to the draft is Udoka. I'm not saying Udoka's being a starter, is definitely a starter next year, but say you did draft a tackle, maybe Chuma becomes your swing tackle.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think what Douglas is doing right now is everything that we thought he would. And I think that people externally were looking at the monstrous names on the market and saying, well, the Jets are definitely going to make a splash with those guys. I never thought that it was definite that they were going to get one of those top guys and they were going to go above a price that they set internally. And he wants to build. You're seeing the ways of trying to build it. And again, third time tonight, we're going to mention Buffalo last year. A lot of value guys they got, and they spent on one big name, and that was Mitch Morse. And again, this draft is loaded with offensive tackle talent, so we'll have to see what happens. And there's plenty of time still remaining in free agency to do even more up front along that offensive line.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Bills because I wanted to pivot into some Bills talk, not because of what they did last year, but because of what they did right after we stopped recording our podcast last night. The Bills then acquire Stefon Diggs, the receiver from the Minnesota Vikings, of course, supremely talented. So in one day, DeAndre Hopkins was traded about lunchtime, and then right before everyone went to bed, Stefon Diggs got traded to the Buffalo Bills. So the Jets will see Diggs twice a year for the foreseeable future. So, Liv, I just wanted to get your take on Stefon Diggs now being a member of the AFC East.
I was definitely not surprised that he got traded because he had that tweet yesterday with the eyes emojis, and everyone was talking about him wanting change and this and that. So I wasn't surprised that a trade happened. I was surprised that it came, he's headed to the AFC East, to the Buffalo Bills. But right away, you saw Josh Allen tweeting, "You dig?" And so they had that back and forth, which was really cool. But to have Stefon Diggs in the AFC East, which now means that Greg Williams and this defense has to face a wide receiver with so much talent. One of, I would say it's fair to say he's one of the top 15, 20 wide receivers in the league. That's my personal opinion. But to have the Jets defense with Greg Williams face him twice a year, I mean, that's got to be in the back of Greg Williams' mind now, right?
I would assume so.
I don't know. You know Greg very well, Liv. I think he's always like, hey,
smart guy.
I'll play with you three. I'll play with Liv, Greens, and EA. We'll figure this out.
He would make it work. He's going to make it work.
He's got so much confidence, and he was one of the top assistant coaches in the National Football League last year. What a wonder it was just to watch him work because the Jets endured so many injuries last year. And I will say that the price was steep, but what do you think, both of you? I'd ask the questions. I would turn the table on both of you in terms of Diggs. Maybe it was worth it for the Bills to go in that direction because they need a number one receiver. John Brown is a good player, but this opens things up for him even more. You got Cole Beasley at that slot position. And Diggs becomes a true number one receiver. He can go up and get those contested balls. He is also a deep threat. And the Bills are surrounding Josh Allen with a lot of offensive talent. So when you looked at the price originally, I was thinking, oh, my God, it's a lot of draft capital. But even though this is a draft I should say, a receiver-rich draft. I don't know if the Bills were going to get somebody the talent of Stefon Diggs at 22 overall. So then what do you look at what you're giving up in addition to that? Yes, the 4th next year, but I believe it was a 5 and a 6 this year. It might be. I don't know if it's a gamble at all. I think people looked at the compensation and say, "Oh my God!" But they're comparing it to the DeAndre Hopkins deal. Again, every deal is different. But the Bills, I think, were determined that we're going to go out and get a piece that gave them an opportunity to see what Josh Allen really is, and can he take that next step.
I feel like the Bills have officially, like, they're shooting their shot, for lack of a better analogy. It feels like they're really going all in this year. And, they were a playoff team last year. And to your point, felt like they needed a receiver. And Stefon Diggs is, I know, Liv, you said like top 20. I'd even, I'm going to argue probably top 8. Stefon Diggs is
top 10.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I said top 8 just to, make it a little more bold. But
come on, increments of 5.
I know. Thank you very much. But I think it was a good move for the Bills. And to your point, EA, I mean, they have money to spend in free agency, and they've been doing so. I saw it was reported they just extended Jordan Poyer. They signed Mario Addison, who I'm sure was under Sean McDermott in Carolina back when he was their defensive coordinator. So I feel like the Bills are officially taking an aggressive step forward. And I think, to your point, it's probably for the best, moving forward this year. And, let's see what you got. And I thought it was a good deal. And, I understand that giving up a lot of draft capital isn't necessarily common for Brandon Beane, the general manager there. But if opportunity arises, I mean, you remember last year, it was Ian Rappaport reported that Antonio Brown was being traded to the Buffalo Bills, and then that ended up falling through. And of course, Antonio Brown went to the Raiders and is now out of the league. But the Bills were clearly in need and wanted a top tier receiver, and I think they got one.
Yeah, I think when you just take a look at the trade as a whole and look at this Bills team, they're a team who made a playoff run last season, and they have a lot of the same pieces returning. They made the big trade for Stefon Diggs, signed a couple of free agents already, re-signed some returning. So some players that are going to be returning to this roster. I think that they're going to be, yet again, a very good team this year. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm super excited to see Stefon Diggs twice a year playing against the Jets. I think that's going to be a great competition for Greg Williams. And I just think of players like Jamal Adams. Obviously, he's a safety, but we've seen him in pass coverage before too. So I'm really excited to see what this Jets defense can do against a wide receiver like him.
Yeah, that's a great lead in, Liv, because we can make the transition here when you're talking about Diggs and what the Bills are doing offensively. The Jets, we're going to find out here in the next couple weeks and months what they're going to do at the cornerback position, because right now there are some question marks. And, I talked about it on the inside last night, is that nickel corner Brian Poole's still out there. And then maybe some decisions to make with guys who currently have contracts, but the Jets could free themselves up with some space as well. So we'll have to see what happens in terms of what the Jets are not only doing at that nickel spot, but on the outside as well.
And just a couple things here. We were talking about receivers. Well, Amari Cooper re-signed at midnight, basically. He re-signed with the Dallas Cowboys. Robbie Anderson still remains unsigned. So we'll see what his market is like externally, and we'll see what his market, if he ends up back in green and white. But I just wanted to focus on the AFC East, because all these new faces between the Miami Dolphins bringing in Byron Jones, the Buffalo Bills bringing in Stefon Diggs, well, a very familiar face, probably the most familiar face in the AFC East, will reportedly no longer be in the division. That, of course, Tom Brady earlier today on Tuesday said he will not be re-signing with the Patriots, will be taking his football journey elsewhere, and all signs point to Tampa Bay. And Adam Schefter and all the experts reported that Tampa Bay is basically the front runner here for Tom Brady to be his new home in South Florida, which is, I mean, it's just crazy to think about. It feels like one of those days where everyone was like, oh, yeah, Tom might go somewhere. Like, he's just going to resign. Like, this happens every year, whatever. And the fact that it's actually coming to fruition that he will no longer be on the Patriots and will be wearing pewter and whatever their colors are. I can't even think about it because my mind is just I can't even picture him in a uniform there.
Yeah, it's going to be weird to see him in a different uniform.
Wild to think about. It feels like doomsday is officially here.
Oh gosh! Don't say
easy. Okay, especially where we're at right now. Easy. I will say this.
Yeah, still on your vocab.
This makes me think of.
I just wanted to make sure you guys were awake. All right.
Hey, I'm always going. This makes me think of Indianapolis when we had Anthony Becht on the Official Jets podcast, and he said at the end, I said, "What do you think? Greens, when we had him on, what do you think about Brady?" He said, I'm beginning to really think that he could go elsewhere. Well, Anthony Becht, a former Buccaneer. Yeah, hey, I don't know what he was hearing in Indianapolis, but that could happen. Brady, you can make the argument, and I don't think too many people are going to fight you on it, that perhaps the greatest quarterback of all time, 6 Super Bowls, 30 playoff wins, 541 touchdown passes for one team. He's the first player in NFL history to switch teams after 20 seasons with one team. And wow. I'll always go back to September 23rd, 2001, Jets 10-3 victory over the Patriots at Foxborough when Sean Ellis and company got to Drew Bledsoe and enters. Here comes this skinny kid from Michigan. Tom Brady goes 5-10 for 46 yards, and 20 years later, we're talking 5-10 for 46 yards in the Jets' victory. And 20 years later, here we're talking about perhaps the greatest ever. And yeah, it's going to be odd. It's going to be odd that he's going to be playing with a different team. And in January, Liv, if I asked you, Liv, do you think Brady, number one, is going to play for a different team next year? And number two, is he going to be playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? What would you have told me?
I would have told you that you were crazy, honestly, because I'm not going to lie. I was shook when he posted that on both Twitter and Instagram, informing everybody that he was no longer going to be a Patriot. It's crazy to wrap your head around as, a person who is not a professional athlete, to think, wow, it's crazy. He spent 20 years with one organization. I don't know how many other players, or if there are other players that have ever done that, but yeah, I was definitely a little bit in shock. And like, to your point, EA, to imagine him in any other team color, but let alone Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that's crazy. I did see this tweet earlier, and it said TB plus TB in TB. So Tom Brady plus Tom Bowles in Tampa Bay. So TB3? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to add another B in there. Antonio Brown had reported or had told everybody that he's only playing if he plays with Tom Brady. And not to speculate here, but Antonio Brown is from Florida. He lives in Florida. And, oh, by the way, Bruce Arians was his coach on the Pittsburgh Steelers, not his head coach. But so there are some ties there. Juicy. And, I wonder, I don't want to speculate, but I just wonder if Tom and Antonio Brown had
all right, you are speculating. What do you think about
what it is?
I want the conspiracy theory.
Granny, take it easy. What do you think about, though, on a serious note, and we're going to joke about it a little bit here in a second. We'll get back to some light moments. Bruce Arians, who I think is one of the top offensive minds in the game, bottom line, and he's a tremendous guy, and he's a good coach. Mike Evans, you got Godwin there, O.J. Howard, Cameron Brate, and then TB, the former Jets head coach, Todd Bowles, heading up that Tampa Bay defense. What do you think overall about the Buccaneers? I'm not asking predictions 2020, but what do you think about what they can do with Brady down there?
I feel like on paper you got to watch out for the Buccaneers, because when you look at what Jameis did last year, he had a career year. Granted, he was a part of the 30-30 club, the 30 touchdown, 30 interception club, and Tom Brady between 2016 to 2019 only had 29 interceptions compared to Jameis's 30 just this past season. So I feel like Tom Brady's going to love it down there. I mean, he's going to sling the rock to Mike Evans, who's obviously one of the best receivers in the game. And then Chris Godwin's one of the best in the game, just based on this past year alone. And, Chris Godwin's probably going to have to change his number, I'd assume. He wore number 12 at Penn State. He's number 12 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers currently. And then how about this? I mean, they have O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate. Right. And I know that O.J. Howard didn't get used a lot this past season, but just to have somebody that was so productive and such a high draft pick, I feel like, I don't know if the offense will necessarily change with Tom there, but we know how much Tom Brady loved to throw the ball to Rob Gronkowski in his heyday. So I wonder if the tight end will be a little more utilized this next season in 2020. And I think on paper, it looks pretty good. They re-signed Jason Pierre-Paul yesterday. They franchise tagged Shaq Barrett, who led the NFL in sacks this past year. And, I still think that they have some holes to fill if you're just going by on paper. But I think that every team's going to have holes. And how about this? Devon White, the rookie linebacker this past year. Yeah, he had a pretty good year for being a rookie. And I think that the arrow is definitely pointing up for the Tampa Bay Bucks. And, put Tom Brady there. The Super Bowl's in Tampa. Let's start the speculating here. There's definitely going to be, there's 100% going to be an article talking about Tom Brady being the first.
There already was.
Yeah, come on, Greens.
There already was. You're behind.
Yeah, Greens, whatever. That's where you're getting it from anyway. Hey,
also, when you think about jumping off your guys' point, also when you think about it, if he does sign with the Buccaneers, he's also going to be facing every single day in practice a Todd Bowles defense. And little reminder, the Jets were, number 7 overall ranked defense this past season, but they were number 2 against the run. They came second to only Todd Bowles' run defense. So to think that the Buccaneers are already going to have a very solid defense to now add Tom Brady into the mix with some of the offensive weapons that they have. Big fan of Mike Evans over here. He, you had
him on your fantasy team, right?
For the past few years. Yeah, I think they could be pretty deadly on paper anyways.
No doubt. So let's bring this back to Jets angle, though. Liv, what do you think? Obviously, this is going to have an impact on the Jets because the Jets face the Patriots twice a year, and this is a team that's dominated the AFC East. You're talking about, I believe, 18 division titles over the last 20 years. With that being said, do you think the Patriots will have Jared Stidham start opening day, or you think their starting quarterback is not currently on the roster? You don't even got to name names.
That's a great question.
There are guys out there who people are talking about trade targets, and we all know the various names. I just want to know what you think. If you think that perhaps they stick with Stidham and bring somebody else in as insurance maybe to compete with him, or do you think that Belichick has a guy in mind because he's prepared for this?
I think, and this is just my personal opinion, I think Belichick is going to bring in another guy. I mean, when you think about some of the quarterbacks that are out there still, what if possibly, don't know if schematically it would work, but what if Cam Newton came to the Patriots? I mean, that could be something very interesting.
Wow, yes. And today he was granted permission to seek a trade. And I know there was a little bit of back and forth that we don't have to get into, but everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah. And when you think about Jared Stidham, the first time the Jets kind of went up against him, Jamal Adams had a pick six. So
that was cool.
Yeah, I'm not going to say I'm just bringing that up.
I want to throw
that out there.
I want to throw in an interesting wrinkle here.
Jameis Winston, an unrestricted free agent.
Yeah, well, actually, I think an interesting potential ripple effect could be what happens with Jacoby Brissett in Indianapolis. And if he ends up getting cut because of salary cap reasons or whatever it is, because Phillip Rivers reportedly is going to join the Colts, does Jacoby Brissett go back to New England and compete with Jared Stidham for the starting job? And Jared Stidham won the backup job in New England this past season. It wasn't like he was just, they drafted Jared Stidham and he was the number 2 from the day he was drafted. I'm pretty sure he won that job. And so, therefore, I think that the Patriots do have some amount of confidence in him. I just don't know to what extent, and none of us do, really. I don't think anyone does because he hasn't been thrown the keys. But I will say, if you look back to when Tom Brady first was given the keys to the offense, no one thought that the 199th overall pick was going to do what he did. And I think that the history that Bill Belichick – being comfortable with a young kid under center leading his team, I can't rule it out that Jared Stidham would not be that guy moving forward this year.
Yeah, that's
I do
Liv
feel
mentioned Cam Newton and Andy Dalton could be a potential trade target. I know a lot of people have talked about that. Jacoby Brissett, Greens, you brought him up. Jameis Winston, unrestricted free agent. It is going to be fascinating for the Jets next year to be facing a New England Patriots team without Tom Brady. I know he's 43 years old, but we talked about the Buccaneers a little bit before, and you said the 30-30 club. That's one thing that Brady always did for the Patriots. He protected the football, and that's something that Bill Belichick has stressed throughout his Hall of Fame career. So whoever is under center is going to be required to hold on to the football, protect the football.
Before we wrap things up here, I want to focus a little bit more on the look ahead as opposed to the look back. And one other thing before we continue on, Teddy Bridgewater supposedly new as Carolina Panther. Congratulations to Teddy. I mean, he had a short stint with the Jets, of course, a summer and a preseason before he was traded to the New Orleans Saints, and he reunites with Joe Brady, the Carolina Panther offensive coordinator who spent some time in New Orleans before joining the LSU Tigers for a season. And of course, they won the national championship, whatever. But moving forward, one thing that I find interesting is there's still some very big names left on the defensive side of the ball in terms of free agents. I mean, Robert Quinn reportedly went to the Chicago Bears today, but Jadeveon Clowney's still out there. Dante Fowler's still out there. And then when you look at the cornerbacks, Chris Harris is still out there, and Trey Wayne's got a big deal today. But if the Jets want, I know that we talked about Joe Douglas finding value guys to sign in free agency. But if he decided for whatever reason that he wanted to address pass rusher or cornerback and go for a top tier free agent, there are still some very good players left out there. And even if the Jets don't get those guys, I'm very curious to see where they end up overall.
Oh, I agree. Listen, the league year is not starting until Wednesday at 4 p.m. I mean, I guess some people could be listening to this around 4 o'clock Wednesday or whatever, but the league year truly doesn't start until 4 p.m. That's when players can officially sign their contracts. But, free agency is going to go on. And you have multiple tiers and multiple waves. There are a lot of good players out there. The trick is, if you're going to sign somebody who is 30 plus what role, and I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about age, is what role are they going to play for you? Because typically the cautionary tale in free agency is you want to find a guy who is still an ascending player who you believe, by and large, unless you're in a certain place, your organization, your team is at a certain place and you need a piece here, a piece there, you want to find ascending talents because, and that's where the Jets are at right now too. Yeah. Could they get a couple guys 30 plus in here? They could. But when you look at what they've done here early in free agency, when we talk about the offensive line, all three of those guys, they're in their 20s. You could say Fant is a guy with a very interesting ceiling who is a tremendous athlete who maybe they can take him to the next level. McGovern is 25, 26 years old, who's been a 2-year starter at center. So you have to think his best football is ahead of him. And likewise, Alex Lewis is a young guy as well. So I'm looking at the guys in the 20s, and can you bring them into your system and develop them? Because everybody thinks of players sometimes as finished products, but what roles are they playing for you in your system? And remember what the CBA really emphasized to me, everyone, was that 60 to 65% of the players in the National Football League are your minimum salary guys. Yeah. So you're going to have to fill out the roster as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. I do have a question. So I know that the official league year starts tomorrow at 4 p.m. as in Wednesday, March 18th, 4 p.m. Eastern time. But with these new rules as far as the coronavirus goes and how it's going to affect signings, aren't some teams basically being given the right to decide to not sign a guy until they have completed that physical? Because a guy can technically still decline doing a physical that them and the team are trying to agree on. So if a guy doesn't get the physical, can they still choose to not sign a player?
I'm not sure on the exact nature of the literature. Obviously, this is like uncharted waters. But I did see, to your point, I did see that, let's say theoretically a free agent is across the country or in a different state, the player and the team can agree on a neutral physician to conduct a physical. But yes, I did see that the player had the option to decline. So, exactly. And I mean, we've talked about this before. Like, I don't know how a team signs off on paying somebody a lucrative contract without that player taking a physical. Yeah. And, I'm very curious to see how it all plays out. And, I think it's just one day at a time. Maybe it's one of those things where teams just agree to terms. And then once this whole thing kind of blows over to a point where you can travel safely, or, you think you can travel safely, then you go to the facility, you take a physical, and then everything becomes official at a later date. Short answer, I have no idea.
I think where we are right now is that third party. You're gonna, and it's unsettling. It's probably unsettling for every team in the National Football League. It's not the way any team would want it. But given the current situation, I think the league and the Players Association are trying to make the best out of a tough situation, bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. I think tomorrow is really going to go down as a very interesting day, to say the least. I think we'll find out a lot of stuff maybe we weren't expecting. Who knows? Everything has been rolling.
Tom Pelissero just tweeted, he says, don't expect a flood of official signing announcement at 4 p.m. tomorrow. The memo says teams may not announce a player has agreed to terms pending a physical only if they have executed a contract with the player. So obviously this is a lot of wait and see right now, but but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of free agent juice, because it hasn't even been 48 hours. And we're talking about a lot of top tier talent that is, reportedly agreed to terms with different teams. So I expect more of that to trickle out tomorrow, but nothing official.
Yeah, Greens and Liv. For me, it's going to be the domino game. You talked about some of those defensive talents on the edge. So let's just say a Clowney goes first. And does that kind of set the market where teams start, and then they start moving in that direction? Likewise, there's a lot of cornerback names out there. A lot of cornerbacks out there. I mean, we talked about Bradbury Jones going early, no doubt. But there's still a lot of prominent names on the market. And then I go back to the receiver position. Yeah, Amari Cooper got the deal, the 5-year, $100 million deal, I think was reported. But Robbie Anderson still floating about, Rashad Perryman, Dorsett, Emmanuel Sanders, Demarcus Robinson. There's a lot of names still out there. There's a lot of ball left to be played.
So just wrapping things up, that was the tip of the iceberg. And so many moves have been made over the past 36 hours. So many more moves will be made, especially when you consider the middle class of each team. And I think the Jets, to your point, are going to look to fill out a lot of the middle class moving forward, considering the way that Joe Douglas has started his free agency with Connor McGovern, who, to EA's point, is turning 27 in late April. Alex Lewis re-signed or agreed to terms. He will turn 28 in late April. And then George Fant, who agreed to terms with the Jets reportedly yesterday, he's 27 years old. So the first three moves for Joe Douglas in his first free agency as general manager of the New York Jets, to surprise nobody, 3 offensive linemen. And we'll monitor this each day as we move forward. So if anything happens past the 9:30 hour here, it's not our fault. We'll cover it tomorrow. And thanks for listening to the official Jets podcast powered by AWS. EA, Liv, stay safe and keep washing those hands.
Peace out.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.